An African-American folk saying claims that our God can make a way out of no way. Noah, Abraham and Sarah, Joseph, and Moses each persevered with God's help amidst almost unimaginable darkness. Through the narratives of these biblical archetypes, we come to experience our own stories in a more hopeful way than we may ever have imagined. This is a series for those times in your life where there seems to be no way out, and for the times when God shines a light in the darkness, providing that way after all.
Good evening and welcome to Darkwood Brew. I'm Chris Alexander, your host, and this is a convergent point for people of faith to gather online and offline, to gather inspiration, encouragement, and support as we all together travel the journey through the dark wood. I'm here tonight with Eric Elness, our special featured guest tonight. And we have his special Aunt Ida's sugar cookies with us today. You want to tell us where these came from?
Oh my goodness, yeah. These came from my great Aunt Ida from Savage, Montana. And I have very fond memories of, oh, these are so good. They just melt in your mouth. The recipe's up on the web. But yeah, I have very fond memories of going to Montana most summers when I was, or a lot of summers when I was growing up, and riding motorcycles, shooting guns, and hunting for agates, and having way too much good food with that whole milk and all that good stuff on their ranch. And these are part of their food tradition and our Christmas tradition every year.
Christmas.
Yeah. So,
excellent. Hey, well, while you're enjoying that, I'll let you know that tonight we're concluding the very first of our series with the narrative lectionary. A Way Out of No Way is this first series. And tonight we'll be dealing specifically with the story of Joshua, but we took a lot of roads to get to this story of Joshua, so let's take a look back.
I walk on foot with a faith and trust.
There are a couple of things that we have to make spiritual practices. One is silence and one is solitude.
If God delivered me yesterday, certainly God can and will deliver me right now.
One day I walk away.
That's what's going on with Abraham and Sarah. When you see them accepting this blessing, that's when you see them becoming a blessing to others.
The sunshine at my side, can I tell you what it's like to sit still in a state of beautiful motion?
The grace of God loves us, guides us, and in many ways waits for us. I think that word wait is not something we use a lot.
The life that's reflected in the Old Testament looks a lot like the life I see in our lives. It's messy.
Well, we certainly have come a long way in these 5 weeks.
It's been a fun 5 weeks.
Yeah. And it is a messy life that we found, right?
Very messy at times, yes.
Well, we have a thorny theological question that we ask each of our narratives. Eric, what's our question today?
Well, first I'm going to kind of check for lightning's possibilities. I don't know if the weather is outside. This one might invite lightning. Do you ever feel like you need a new God? Do you ever feel like you need a new God? You want to do an upgrade or a downgrade or a sideways trade or you know what? And yeah, that question actually was provoked from our encounter with the text tonight. So we'll
we're still here, so hopefully we have time to explore. Let's take a look at or listen for our Numa Divina from the book of Joshua, the 24th chapter, verses 1 through 15.
Then Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel to Shechem and summoned the elders, the heads, the judges, and the officers of Israel. And they presented themselves before God. And Joshua said to all the people, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, long ago your ancestors, Terah and his sons Abraham and Nahor, lived beyond the Euphrates and served other gods. Then I took your father Abraham from beyond the river and led him through all the land of Canaan and made his offspring many. I gave him Isaac, and to Isaac I gave Jacob, and Jacob Esau. I gave Esau the hill country of Seir to possess, but Jacob and his children went down to Egypt. Then I sent Moses and Aaron, and I plagued Egypt, and what I did in its midst, and afterwards I brought you out. When I brought your ancestors out of Egypt, you came to the sea, and the Egyptians pursued your ancestors with chariots and horsemen to the Red Sea. When they cried out to the Lord, he put darkness between you and the Egyptians, and made the sea come upon them and cover them, and your eyes saw what I did to Egypt. Afterwards, you lived in the wilderness a long time. Then I brought you to the land of the Amorites, who lived on the other side of the Jordan. They fought with you, and I handed them over to you, and you took possession of their land, and I destroyed them before you. Then King Balak, son of Zippor of Moab, set out to fight against Israel. He sent and invited Balaam, son of Beor, to curse you, but I would not listen to Balaam. Therefore he blessed you, so I rescued you out of his hand. When you went over the Jordan and came to Jericho, the citizens of Jericho fought against you, and also the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, and I handed them over to you. I sent the hornet ahead of you, which drove out before you the 2 kings of the Amorites. It was not by your sword or by your bow. I gave you a land on which you had not labored, and towns you had not built, and you live in them. You eat the fruit of vineyards and oliveyards that you did not plant. Now therefore revere the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in faithfulness. Put away the gods that your ancestors served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. Now if you are unwilling to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods of your ancestors served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord.
Well, that was certainly impressive.
A lot of stuff going on there.
A lot of stuff going on. But we did make a huge jump in their narratives, did we not? I mean, wasn't it just last week we were at Mount Sinai with Moses?
That's right, in the middle of the wilderness after the Exodus from Egypt, and
Yeah.
right there. And then now suddenly we are on another mountain at the base of Mount Shechem in the land of promise now. A whole lot has happened. Joshua, who was
40 years just went by. What happened?
Yeah, Joshua, who was just a young buck during the Exodus time period, now is at the end of his life. According to the Bible, he's about 110 years old, and has called together the people of Israel to kind of reaffirm their covenant with God. And after they have kind of made it in the Promised Land and gone through all kinds of battles, and depending on which book you read, those battles either went blaze and very fast, and they were almost always successful, or it went really slowly with mixed results, and depending on whether they read Joshua or Judges. But in any case, this is now the end. They are established in the land, and Joshua's called the people together, saying, hey, which God are you going to serve now? Interestingly, he says, put away your other gods. I thought they put them away like a long time ago, but apparently there were still some around. Yeah. I mean, and he actually says, or don't put them away. I mean, you choose. Are you going to serve this one, or are you going to serve one of these others? But it's time to really make that commitment stick.
Well, our thorny theological question says that we might need a new God. What is the God we've been following? Who is the God we've been following all along?
Yeah, well, it doesn't suggest one way or the other, but the question that is, but it does raise that question. In terms of the God that we have been encountering thus far in our series, we started out the series with the account of Noah and the flood, and we asked that question: how can you trust, or you might ask, how could you choose to follow a God who allows evil in the world and works through some really devastating circumstances and some people who are profoundly imperfect. And we were really challenged to if we're going to follow this particular God, the God that's revealed in these stories, we have to follow a God who accepts imperfection, who actually brings people into the world who are highly imperfect and chooses to work through them. And do we either bow to God's bow, in a sense? Do we bow to God's decision to stay with us and work through us? Or are we looking for some other God who will give us some perfect world to live in? We looked at Abraham and Sarah the next week and their call from God, and really asked that question, not simply can we trust God, but can God trust us? Because in Abraham and Sarah, we found a couple who, like Noah before, are highly imperfect, and at every kind of critical junction, they tend to make poor choices, try to take matters into their own hand, and yet God keeps working with them, and we have to kind of ask, well, why?
Yeah.
And what does God trust in us? And we really came back around to, well, what God trusts is not our perfection, but rather our love. Our falling in love with God's love of us, our attraction to God's love for us, and that love keeps us coming back, trying to do a new thing when we've discovered we've taken a wrong turn.
That
and
compass points that brings us back.
Yeah. And also this God we've chosen to follow, if we choose to follow this one, is one that will not hesitate to call us into the unknown at times. Just like they were called to travel from Ur to a land that they had no idea about where they're going. We followed that with the story of Joseph and his time spent in prison. Here's another guy for whom he had a lot higher sense of perfections about him in the story anyway. Seems to be a pretty even-tempered and good-hearted person, but he has a lot of bad stuff happen to him. A lot of bad stuff. Being thrown in a pit by your brothers and sold as a slave into Egypt, and so forth. And now we met him in prison. And we really challenge this God, if we're going to follow this God is not the God of the prosperity gospel that says, if you just have a little faith, everything will work out just fine. But rather, this God is one who says, if you're going to find me, you're going to find me in the heart of your struggle as well as in the absence of it. So, you're going to go through a lot of struggle. Sometimes faith in God actually, and a faithful path leads to more struggle, not necessarily less. Certainly wasn't the case in Joseph's time. We also then looked at the crossing of the Red Sea. We met Israel again there after they had been slaves, and God is bringing them out, and you got Pharaoh's army in pursuit and the sea blocking them, and we asked, who is this God that we're called to follow? And really the answer that week came back that this God is one who is not just kind of a gives you a command and you can just simply follow it, just here's what God wants of me and I can just follow this forever. But actually there's a changeability. We have to listen continually for this God and God's commands, because there are times when every impulse in us wants to act, spring into action, but we are called to stay still, as the Israelites were when the sea was blocking them and Pharaoh's army was coming. Moses says, you need to stand still and let God fight for you for a bit. Here.
Which
and
is
then
a big challenge, right?
Yeah, when you've got when the stakes are high in our own life, we want to do something to alleviate that stress, and to feel safe. But sometimes we do something and we act too soon, we actually make matters worse, or we miss an opportunity that was in the process of opening for us, but we leapt too soon. But then once that way is made, once the water figuratively parts, we're really called to get into action. One wonders in the story how long those waters would have remained open if Israel would have appointed a subcommittee to study the risks and rewards, relative risks and rewards of crossing when they did, and had a congregational vote and all that. It's like when God opens the seas, like you go. It's your time to go. Quit standing still now. Don't have your prayer meetings anymore. Go and do it. So that's kind of where the story has taken us thus far. And then last week we had then they're in the promised land. I mean, they're in the middle of the wilderness in Sinai, and they receive this covenant. And so there is a really kind of the shadow of this story this week. This week they're at the mountain in Shechem affirming a covenant. Before they were at Sinai affirming this covenant and these rules, these 10 commands that God has given us. And that's the other part of the equation is that when we are in relationship with this God, there's always something asked of us also, ways that we can help God make a way for us. And that includes, these 10 commands are really seen as primary to helping God help us. Each one of them works for our benefit. They're not just simply capricious commands meant to just prove our loyalty. Every single one, if you were actually to follow just one of those commands, if all of us were always to follow just one, it would completely transform life as we know it on this planet, and let alone following all 10.
So in each of these stories, we have God calling us to something as well as us having to choose an action of some kind in order to follow God into God's calling.
Absolutely.
But in this particular story of Joshua, we have God killing people on behalf of Israel. We have God inhabiting lands that are already inhabited. We have some pretty violent stuff going on. Is this really the God that we want to follow? Look for that lightning struck.
Yeah, well, that's a question for everybody to wrestle with, and I doubt that there are, if the answer comes easy to any of us, that we're really on a right answer, or on a good path. I mean, not in terms of maybe about this God, but is this God that we've come into awareness of and that we experience, is this God a God of violence, or to what extent, and how does that take place, and when is it ever justified, and so forth? It raises up a lot of really further thorny theological questions. A God who, says, here's this population, they are basically to be wiped out in order to establish you, and yes, you will bless the world through them, but also does that raise the question, do the ends justify the means? But then again, it also raises that question, well, if God has chosen to work with a messy world, would Israel have been established in a way that they could, through which the world could be blessed, if they came into Canaan and said, you know what, God has told us it would be really great for us to kind of live together, be happy, that we should inhabit the land with you, and we are just going to love you to death, so you can follow us, and likely...
They would have let him in.
Likely that wouldn't have happened either. So how does if any of us were God working with the likes of us, how would we get any of this work done if we're the most loving, love people truly beyond our wildest imagination? How do we get it done in a world where those principles are not followed? And can you get any work done at all if you aren't also kind of somehow joining with the world without being of the world? Those are questions that are hard to answer, and I think that the tension there is really important not to eliminate.
Right. Even if they're challenging, I know that we ourselves have a whole team of folks that have been talking about this for about a week now, getting ready for the show, and there are no easy answers. We struggled with it continually.
Just this morning for about an hour and a half.
Just this morning for another hour and a half trying to get a handle on it, and sometimes it's hard to find a way into these stories, and that's why they're so challenging for us.
Yeah, and one of the to look at the scholarly literature on this too. One of the things to bear in mind, I don't want to divert the question into this kind of lengthy theological, scholarly exposition, but one of the things important to keep in mind regarding modern scholarship on the Joshua, the settlement of Israel and so forth, is that the book of Judges probably has it more right than the book of Joshua. In other words, that this was a much slower kind of thing with a lot more mixed results and with a lot more intermingling with the peoples than Joshua would imply. Mm-hmm. Likely Joshua is coming from a time when that was influenced by the exile. In fact, probably parts of it were written or edited during the exile in Babylonia centuries later, where people are really asking that question, if there's one God and this God is all loving, then how are we now sitting here in Babylon? Right. Having had a lot of our relatives killed, Jerusalem has been devastated, the temple is gone, we are sitting in dust and ashes in lament, and how could this have happened? And there were many answers in exile. So one was, Yahweh isn't the true God. Marduk is. We need to switch sides. Another answer that is less really part of the ancient context, is more part of our modern context, is there a God at all? Another answer is one that is more highly reflected in those who edited some of these ancient texts, like Joshua and Deuteronomy and such, which said, it's not God that's the problem, it's us. We have consistently let God down, and that's gotten systemic. And God, out of God's love and mercy, actually had to kind of break that system, break us with it, because we were of the system, to refashion it into something new. And whether they're right or they were wrong about in their assessment, one thing that is beyond dispute is that during that exile was some of the greatest theological development in Israel's history. It was almost a renaissance of theology in Israel's history. So, maybe sometimes we do need to get kind of broken down and and reformed. But they're looking back and they're kind of looking back at history and saying, well, maybe the big problem is we followed too many gods. We weren't following closely enough, and so they kind of re-evaluated their own history in that light, and adjusted their interpretations even about what went on and why in light of those. So.
Well, our thorny theological question asks us, do we need a new God? Maybe if we ask ourselves that question, maybe it's what's our interpretation of God? What's our image of God? How are we using our own self-interest and our definition of God and picturing God? And do we need to find a new God?
Yeah. Or maybe not a new God, or so much as a new awareness of God. I don't think it's coincidental that Jesus, his name in Hebrew is Yeshua, which is Joshua. Here he's named after this very person that we're struggling with. Who's led this great conquest. And I think there's a kind of a terrifying and fierce poetry, there, that Jesus is the new Joshua. But he's not the Joshua like the old Joshua. Jesus is completely flipping that system of violence on its head. He's leading a new revolution where the drama is just as high, if not higher. But it's an internal revolution, and it's a nonviolent revolution. It's seeing that the best way to defeat an enemy is to convert them into friends. To love your neighbor as yourself. And so, henceforth, it's always been hard in Christianity to justify violence, warring among nations and so forth. Not that Christians have not done that.
Oh, no. Yeah.
But it's really, it raises this incredibly high standard. It's like you don't kill if you're going to kill somebody, you also have to be able to hit the bar of love your neighbor as yourself. And so you have to somehow, how are you reconciling that? And so all kind of warfare becomes problematic, and all war, becomes, suspect. We talk about just war theory. Somebody made the comment in our meeting earlier today, like, what is a just war? A just war can only be fought by just people. Okay, well, where do we find just people? Nowhere. Right. So when is war ever just? It may happen, and it may sometimes be necessary. But to simply call a war just is problematic.
Well, creating a whole new pathway for us to make a new way of being in the world can take on many images. It doesn't have to be, it can be a grace-driven image like Jesus refers to in the whole repentance idea, right? It makes a whole new way. Yeah. And the Joshua story is, in fact, making a new way for Israel to be a new people of God, right?
Yes, and within the understandings of the day,
right.
and the methods and modes available to them in the day. And we look back at it's a story as Christians. We can't look back at it at least I can't, because I've never been another person of another faith.
Sure.
I look back at that and I say, okay, well, I think something did change with Jesus. Jesus didn't open a door that was closed, but revealed a door that had been open. In a much higher kind of awareness of that. And so you look. I love that image of Jesus in the book of Revelation, actually, where this wild image of Jesus with flaming eyes and standing around these 7 standards and all the 7 stars. But he's got this sword coming out of his mouth. And the image is beautiful because it's not a sword of metal. It's the sword of the word. He said it's Revelation's way of saying, okay, everything you're about to hear that suggests violence is about word. It's about spirit. It's not about metal and guns, nuclear bombs and stuff like that. It's the word that pierces you, the word of truth that pierces you, cuts you to the quick. You even use that language of violence, even with respect to truth.
Two sides of the same sword, right?
Paul talks about putting on the armor of Christ. Well, what is the armor of Christ? Has nothing to do with physical violence.
Right.
Everything to do with righteousness, humility, faith, hope, joy, those kinds of things. That's the armor that we are now to don. That's what the new Joshua wears.
Well, this story seems to be telling itself over and over again, like when you've mentioned before about the whole mythical imagination idea, that these stories are just continue to happen over and over, and it's not just a once-time thing for all.
Yes.
So how does that then influence our understanding of how Joshua might still speak to us today?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think this story falls solidly in that mythological imagination of Israel. It's not like free creation, let's lie to people. It's like, let's describe these dynamics that happen over and over again. They're trying to describe dynamics likely during the exile. They're not talking really about events that happened long ago. And one of the things that the violence at this time is not worrying them. They're not having these. I think there is tension there also in the Hebrew Bible about the use of violence. In fact, I know there is. But they're not as worried as maybe we are about that. What they're really seeing in this is God saying, listen, I've done all these things for you. I've given you that which you didn't even have to work for. I mean, it's really, they're seeing the grace in this. It's like you've been given all this stuff that you didn't even work for, that you never raised a finger to deserve, because you're so much better than anybody else, or it's simply because of my love for you. And if we simply take that layer of that and affirm that, like, where do I see that happening in my life? Where I've been giving, blessed after blessed, I've received blessing after blessing after blessing without necessarily feeling so worthy of that blessing. And then what Joshua was saying is, listen, you've seen all these blessings now. Now, after seeing all this, basically, it's time to decide. Because you're not really going to have more proof that you are loved, that you are blessed, that this God's willing to work with you than you have now. So choose this day who you're going to serve. And in fact, it's interesting because what's not in our text is the people say, well, we want to follow. We do want to serve Yahweh. And then Joshua says, no, you don't. No, you don't. You're not going to be able to do this. And things are going to be really hard, and you're never going to make, you're going to be able to live up those standards, and it'll get even harder when you don't. And they say, no, we do. I mean, and so finally they convinced Joshua, okay, great, we'll do it then. And so there is a sense of blessed grace that keeps coming back to us at these important moments. This is a similar thing with the Sinai narrative where God says, I've done all this for you. Now, do you want to deepen the relationship or don't you? If you don't, that's fine. But if you do, here's some rules. It's like these regular points. We've been blessed. We get these great blessings. And then in a sense, God pulls back and says, okay, now, I don't want to control you here. I don't want to just assume that because you've been blessed, we're going to be in this relationship. This is really about your choice, not mine. I've already chosen you. But it's your free choice to choose me.
Yeah.
And God is not, holding up this, hellfire saying, if you don't, here's where you'll go. It's just simply saying, here's the blessings. Do you want this to continue, this relationship to continue, or do you want to go your own way, find some other God that'll be better for you? And I think regularly in our own lives we have that. We're kind of faced with those decision points.
Yeah.
Have I been convinced yet that this is the God I want to follow?
Well, and then when we talked about our role and all that, even as God is being revealed through all these stories and this lived experience that the Hebrew people have, what can we do to help God help us? What are those things that we can be doing that as we pay attention and do discernment with God and listening to God, standing by the Red Sea, stopping and taking notice, how can we help? How can we help God help us?
Yeah. Well, that's a really good question. I see they're holding up the sign. We're out of time, so maybe we can take that into the Q&A or something.
Wow.
The brouhaha. Or let people answer that for themselves.
Well, then, if we're out of time, I wasn't even paying attention. This is amazing. It's a good conversation. Wow, we got a lot of information covered. So we're going to need time to gather our questions together from the people online because we've talked so much. There's probably a ton of questions out there. So we'll gather those and we'll come right back and talk about social media.
Excellent.
Okay. We put our thorny theological question up on social media this week.
Yeah, well, apparently, maybe we've triggered a response. I don't know. I don't know if you've heard the little radio going off in the background, but that was a tornado warning for Omaha.
There's some kind of warning. Anybody been outside lately?
We'll continue to monitor that.
Yeah.
But it may be we got too thorny. Who knows?
Yeah. That is a bit scary. Let's divert the fact that our thorny theological question was not just us. It also went out to all of our brewers out through the social media on Facebook, and Ian Lynch and Will Rainey have responded to that. The question was, Joshua calls us to choose what God will you follow. Do we need a new God? And Will's answer was, I find myself worshiping a lot of things that aren't God and needing a course correction. I often stew about what I worship more on Sundays, football or God. If I could only get as excited about God on Sundays as I do about the Lions. Which, it takes a lot to be excited about the Lions. So there you go. It would be fun.
Especially since Christians were once thrown to them.
Oh, good point. Maybe there was a double entendre there. But there is that whole idea that we have all these gods that we struggle with, and what God are we lifting up as opposed to the God that's calling us to be a part of that.
Put his finger on the national religion.
Right, exactly. Ian Lynch wrote, I choose a new God when I come to believe that God didn't write the Bible, thus ordering the deaths of the infidel Canaanites, but is heard instead in the voice of Jesus telling us to love our enemies, which is an initial way of saying, how do we read the Bible? Where are we reading God's image into that? And how do we interpret that as we go? So I think Ian put his finger on that and said God was not the one that physically wrote the Bible, or how do we interpret our canon within a canon, as we always say. Right?
Yeah. What was it, the poet, I think it was Rilke, who once said, had this poem about winning does not interest this man. No, what moves him is being conquered repeatedly and decisively by an increasingly more powerful being. And I think that's a great image about this God. I want a new God. I don't want to change gods, but I want to be utterly defeated, conquered, humiliated even at times by an increasingly large awareness of God. A God who comes to me in ways that I couldn't even fathom and persuades me that this is a truer awareness of this God. I think that's what Ian's kind of putting his finger on.
That is, I think, exactly what he's trying to say. We also, on our, not social media, but on our emails that we get periodically from brewers out there that have been watching the show, we got an email this week from Malcolm in the United Kingdom, in London, actually. You get some new coffee. And
thank you.
What Malcolm says is, Dear Darkwood Brew, I've just discovered your site and just want to thank you for your wonderful broadcasts. I'm working through some of your previous episodes, The Gifts of the Darkwood, and I'm finding them really stimulating, helpful, and interesting. I love the format. The jazz is great too. Wish we could find a church like yours here. With thanks and best wishes, Malcolm.
Oh, well, Malcolm, if you're watching, hey, welcome home.
Thank you.
You found a church there. It's coming. We're coming to you. You don't have to come to us.
You don't have to go looking. Here we are.
Yeah. Thanks for your note.
So that's really nice.
Yeah.
So now we have questions from in-house or from the...
Yeah. Got one over here.
Do you have Randy Sanders is our chat administrator tonight. So Randy, what's the chatter?
Well, we've had a pretty active night online. We have a compound question for Eric here. It's a three-parter.
Uh-oh.
So
we're done then.
We're going to get you all messed up
Three-parter.
here.
Oh my gosh. I'm going to put both feet on my chair here.
What does God promise if we leave the others behind? How do we know it will be worth the bother? And what is the penalty if we follow the wrong God? Oh, that's a
They
whole
think
night in
I
itself.
have answers to those questions.
Well, they didn't ask me.
That's from Scott Grizel.
Okay. Thanks, Scott. Okay. So what is the what's the Left Behind piece? Is he watching that movie?
What is God's promise if we leave the other gods behind?
Oh, what does God promise if we leave the other gods behind? Oh, okay, gotcha. I think that G.K. Chesterton once answered that best. He said, I think I've got that quote.
I was going to be really impressed if you could get that right off the top of your head.
Yeah, oh, geez. He said the follower, I'm not going to be able to find it on my computer, but he said the followers of Jesus are promised really three things. One is to be fearless, the other is to be joyful, and the other is to be constantly in trouble. And I think you've hit the right God when you have all those three things going for you. So what you leave behind is fear, what you leave behind is no hope or joy, and what you leave behind is a safe, easy life.
Yeah,
Yep.
that answers it. What's the consequence if you? What the third question was? What is the consequence if you choose the wrong God?
You get that God.
Yeah, you have to live with that God. Exactly. That is that live punishment that we talked about earlier, right? That if you're choosing a God that is not the God that loves you beyond your wildest imagination, then you have to settle for a life that's so much smaller than what you could have. And so technically your consequence is having to live with the God that you choose. And I think that's what Joshua is exactly challenging us about this week, is being able to say to you, what are you called to do? You are called to be children of God, the God that loves you beyond your wildest imagination. Why would you pick anything less than that? Why would you limit yourself to what you were created to be and what you're capable of being in the world?
Yeah. Sometimes I wonder, and I'm not making any claims here because I've never been on the other side. this is like sheer raw speculation. In fact, I'm not even speculating. I'm just tossing out ideas. But sometimes I do wonder about when we hear in our world these constant do this or you're going to hell, or all this nastiness and stuff like that. If maybe there's a thread of this that actually is responding to something that could be true, meaning not that there's this hell that God tosses people into with no hope of ever getting out, but maybe something about our experience in the afterlife, we experience or get a glimpse of, or whatever is the world that we would have been created if everybody acted like us and who wanted the same things as us. And I'm not claiming that's the case, but I'm saying that maybe we come in, if we had some sort of awareness of that, what would the world look like if you were in charge, if everybody acted like you? That sometimes that, to me, puts into alignment some of this kind of hellfire and brimstone stuff. It's like, okay, if you can't get woken up by the grace, then wake up, look, let's put this world up in front of you. This is a really painful place here. Mm-hmm. Would you want to live in this world that you are trying to create through the way you are living your life, or through how you are, treating other people? Maybe there's some sense in it that way, and that either we kind of come into awareness of that, or we get to experience that until we say, I don't want that. I want something better. Maybe even life in this world is the product of a life we would have created. Before us. I don't know. I'm not
standing
speculating.
on that edge of the Red Sea, though. That's exactly what we're called to be about, right? Is listening, being able to imagine what the world that we think we want looks like, and then seeing what the repercussions of that would be.
Yeah.
That's where that discernment piece comes in.
Yeah. Imagine if we actually, if we live beyond this life. I mean, what if we lived before this life too, on whatever way that I wouldn't have any idea how that means. But maybe, what if the life even in this world is really the kind of the world we're living in now is the kind of world that would take place in the way whatever we were living our life before. And so what we're doing is that we're experiencing, and I'm not suggesting this. I'm just thinking. It's fun to think about these things. I'm not saying I think this is what's going on. But what if there is this deep justice to the world? Like, this is the world we would have created for ourselves. Now experience it. Now what do you want? Are you happy with what's there, or are you yearning for something higher? Do you have this intuition that the world can be a better place? Do you yearn for that? Do you fall asleep at night, yearning for that love? Are you putting your life into motion to create a better world? And who knows? I think there's something about God's love and God's justice that keeps wanting to work with us to help us work these things out in ways that honor our free will, honor justice, and honor God's unimaginably immense love and grace for us. And so whether that kind of speculation is correct or not, I don't know, but those principles, I think, are there.
Well, those principles are exactly those things that will make sure that God is, in fact, making a way out of no way, right?
Yeah.
And that's what our series has been all about. And this conversation just opens the discussion to how does God act on our behalf in order to make that way open to us, and then what is our response to God and God's love in order to step out into that new path. So thank you for this series. It's been a fabulous series. It's been great discussion.
It's been wonderful. I think if I were to kind of put a cap on everything that we've gone on, it's that this whole spiritual path that we've been seeing all the way through is really points to that principle that God works with us in a messy world, in sometimes messy ways. That don't lead us away from stress and struggle, but sometimes deep into the heart of it. But they're always take place in such a way that move us to a higher place, and enough of a higher place that we can that at different points in our life, maybe not right away after going through a hard period, but different points we can turn back and say, I would never choose this, or this to have happened. I'm not saying they're good, but in order to be here, I would live it all over again. And to me, that's the surest sign of that spiritual path, that it's actually working for you, that it's actually being lived out, is that it's not that we have no regrets, but the regrets are outweighed by the advances. And we say, I've benefited here. I've got a net gain here. So I would do it again in order to be here.
In order to participate with God and what God's already doing.
Yeah, and that's a God I'll follow.
That is a God I'll follow. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hey.
So we want to turn to our musical guests tonight. They're joining us from Sioux Falls, and this is Matt Wallace and the Haig Brothers. Matt is a local. Hey,
hi.
Good to see you guys tonight.
Oh, it's great to be here. It's always a good time to be with you guys.
You guys are in Omaha for a few days, I understand, and
we are.
I understand you guys are now best friends with Bruce Hornsby. Is that right? Is that rumor true?
He just doesn't know that.
Oh, he doesn't know that. Okay.
As soon as he finds out, man, it's really going to be something. We recorded something in Omaha that happened to make its way onto an international release of Bruce Hornsby songs.
Oh.
It just worked that way. It was one of those special confluences of events, and he has guys that just mine the web and look for songs. They release these albums of people doing Bruce's music. He vets the album, and then the money gets donated to charities that he approves.
Oh.
And so that's what we're in town in part promoting, is that somehow we ended up on this thing.
Wow.
And we're going to play a lot of music by him during the course of the weekend. So
Awesome. What do you have for us tonight?
we have a song that's an original song called Anyone. And I was thinking about this as you were wrapping up the talk. These lyrics really work with the message that you're talking about tonight. It says, anyone who calls me, I'm searching for that someone who will listen to me. I don't know if I'll crumble down. Will I be of even passing interest later on? So evidently the singer of this song, I don't know who that would be, is in the same sort of doubt that you're talking about.
Excellent.
Never gets any easier.
That means you're in a good space.
Anyone who calls am searching for that someone who will listen to me. I don't know if I crumple down. Will I be of even passing interest later on? Ooh, yeah. Whoa. Ooh, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, anyone can save me, to take me back with you to where I can be real. For anyone who loves me, love me right away. Show me how you feel. Hey! Any day I'm gonna see the sunshine. I'm gonna see all things just as they were meant to be seen clearly. But everything's gonna be so clear. I'm gonna live forever captured in a moment here. Anyone can save me, but even if it's just by looking deep inside your eyes. Anyone who loves me, love me right away. You take me by surprise. Something more than this, that is what I'm after. I am searching for that somebody who loves me. That is what I'm after. I can't wait to find you, anyone. Oh, something more than this, that is what I'm after. I am searching for that somebody who loves me. Well, that is what I'm after. I can't wait to find you, anybody. Something more than this, that is what I'm after. I am searching for that somebody who loves me. Well, that is what I'm after. I can't wait to find you, anybody. Oh.
got a question.
Yeah?
John of the Hegg brothers is named the sidekick of Jeremy the older, right, guys? Right. So what exactly does that make Matt?
Their love child.
He's the trickster.
The trickster, okay.
The Carl Jung.
Disruptive force.
Nice.
Excellent.
He's our Obi-Wan Kenobi.
That's wonderful music. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys. Okay.
Okay, we have a question in the room. Tracy?
We do have.
Yeah, hi, Chris and Eric. I'm not sure if I'm taking this in a place that you maybe don't want to go, but I'll tell you what's on my mind, and it's just this. As I listened to the passage tonight, I was reminded, as has been commented on already, about how very violent our God can be, and full of retribution and gnashing of teeth and all that in the Old Testament. And I find myself thinking that Jews and Muslims and Christians in the modern world share something, at least from my perspective, my knowledge of the Quran and of the Bible, which is probably, I would say, maybe typical of many people in this country. I don't have great knowledge of it by any means, but it seems to me that there's a common problem, that our holy books are talking about a God who either wants or himself does some very violent things, and I wonder how we can. I was thinking, in a way, I was struck by the similarity between what God did to the Canaanites tonight, in a sense, and sorry for the rather strong comparison, but what ISIS is doing in Iraq, going in and just simply establishing what they believe through their faith is the right form of government, and basically doing it any which way. So I'm wondering, how do we as modern Jews, Christians, and Muslims, how do we approach our holy book? We don't want, we're not looking to go back to the Crusades, and obviously we don't want jihads and the kind of thing that's going on in the Middle East right now. How do we look at these kinds of passages and make sense of them as modern believers?
That's an excellent question. I think you shared some feelings about, I saw kind of on the chat too, as we were going to, how does this text possibly even placate a community in exile? I think it is important to kind of locate these texts in history and understand the dynamics in history. That helps us understand a little bit more about why they would write the way they do. They had just suffered great violence, and they thought it was because they drifted away from their God, and so this is their way of kind of describing that, like, don't do this because life gets extremely hard, and they're kind of raising the bar. But I have to go back to myself. I read this as a Christian. I'm not reading this as a Jew or a Muslim, and so I can't comment as a Jew or a Muslim on this. I think Jesus really did change the equation on things, and I think as a way that is in conformance, actually, with the best of Judaism, and also that Islam would fully confirm in the best of Islam. And Jesus really does. I mean, it's really hard to get around the Sermon on the Mount and love your enemies and do good to those who hate you and pray for those who persecute you. And we've constantly over time minimalized those words and said he's naive. We've given lip service to them, that we say, oh well, but really in the real world we would, that's just not the way the world operates. But I think it's become abundantly clear in our world, whether it was the case 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago or not, in our world it's clear that if we don't learn to love our enemies in some profoundly different ways than we've been loving them in the past, that this world is likely going to be history in the next century or so. Our technologies for killing people just get better and better and better, whether it be launching a massive biological, kind of terroristic attack or nuclear weapons or what have you. We have to take these words more seriously than ever. And I actually think that we're in a position where even though this has not worked out for 2,000 years, I think we're actually in a better position now to take these words seriously than we have been in the past. And what I mean by that is sometimes deep spiritual principles only come into practice when they're needed, like absolutely needed, and especially those harder ones. And it's like, for instance, the programmable computer was actually built in 1851. The first programmable computer was built in 1851. And it was designed. They actually built this a few years ago to see if it actually worked, and it did. It calculated decibels out to the 30th, made equations out to the 30th decimal. So it was an amazingly accurate computer, but it was never built. Why wasn't it ever built? Because they didn't need computers like that back then. They didn't need, manufacturing tolerances were not even close to 30 decimal points and stuff like that. But when the world needed that, the technology came into being. And I think that right now, Jesus offered that early technology that we all kind of thought we could do without. And maybe we didn't need that in terms of the survival of human civilization. But now we absolutely do. So I do think that I look back at this as a Christian. I also look back at this as a Christian living in the 21st century. And I have to say things have changed. But I think that they haven't changed so much like as we think, because even Augustine back in the 4th century said the way you read Scripture is if anything that Scripture tells you to do goes against the rule of love. And that is, you love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and your neighbors yourself, then your interpretation of Scripture is to be held suspect, or the Scripture itself. And I think he was dead on. I mean, that's back in the 4th century, he's saying, 4th, 5th centuries. That if we're going to read these texts about God bringing Canaanites, wiping out Canaanites and so forth, and say, oh, well, let's go and do likewise, I don't think we have any warrant for that, whatsoever.
In a conversation I had recently with one of the rabbis here in the community, we talked about how all the Muslims, the Christians, and the Jews all have terrifying texts in their history and in their holy scriptures. But they also have terrifyingly loving texts. So why would you choose the destructive texts to be extremist about instead of the loving texts?
Yeah.
I mean, what would happen when we talked about, the Ten Commandments? What happens if you just take one of them seriously and everybody does it? How that would change the world. What happens if we take one of the loving texts and push it to its extreme and see where that gets us in the world? Why is it okay to justify any kind of extremist action, whether it's the KKK, whether it's ISIS, whether it's Nazism, whether it's whatever, and not take equally as seriously the love your neighbor as yourself or love your enemies?
Yeah. And
that would be my question back.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent.
So
yeah.
What we're talking about is looking at our holy books, the necessity to read them and think about them through a very discriminating lens.
Yeah, we're called to look at our holy books with a discriminating lens, and that I think has always been the case, too, and is a must in our day. That we have no authority. I don't consider as a Christian minister, I have the authority to represent any God than the one that loves us beyond our wildest imagination. That's all of us. And that anything that contradicts that, fundamentally, I have no authority to preach, and am actually in the wrong to preach or to support. Now, having said that, I want to press even myself on that, because I'm 99.9% pacifist. But there's a 10% there. And I think the 10th, I don't actually understand my own pacifism unless I understand that 10% that's not. So for instance, I will affirm that if somebody breaks into my house with the intent to rape and kill my wife or my family, I'm going to put that person down, and I'm not really going to ask questions about it. And that's because the good that I'm trying to protect is so clear compared to the evil that is about to be taken care of. Well, if I could personalize that, say, well, in my family situation, I could actually justify an act of violence, then I have to also say, well, are there contexts that are larger than my particular family where that could happen? If a country has systematized evil, like, say, for instance, in Nazi Germany, where evil wasn't just simply about, like, I want to be a mean, evil, nasty person. The really scary thing about Nazi Germany was that everybody was fulfilled, you could most people, not all of them, but could say, I'm a good person, I obey the laws, I put in my work, and yes, I'm building, I'm making tiles, and yes, they're going into, you're not even necessarily knowing they're going into gas chambers and stuff like this, and I'm being a good accountant, and yes, the accountants, the records you're keeping are pretty bad. But when evil becomes systemic, it swiftly goes out of our control, out of our ability to do anything about it. And when an entire country puts out way more pain than the good they're generating in the world, what is the response of a loving God in that situation? Is it loving of God to sit back and say, well, let it go, and it's going to keep going because no person, not even any group of persons, has the ability to change this system? Or does God help take down the system? And if God helps take down the system, then there would be people who are, involved in that. And so those are just those nasty questions that I think all of us need to kind of be uncomfortable about.
And one of the things that we had a similar conversation like this morning in our worship planning team, and we talked about, well, what is it what value do you have that's high enough that you would fight for? So like you would say, where you're. For me, it was my kids. If somebody was attacking me, it would be no choice. It would be me that goes, not them, because I just wouldn't be able to fight back. But if somebody goes after my kids, I'm going to fight back. That's where my value is. And it was very apparent to me as a mother that a lot of those things shifted for me. That there was a violence in me that I didn't know was there in order to protect and in order to make things good. So there is a realness in that. That's where that messiness comes from, I think, in our Old Testament, to say we all have that in us. And we all have that characteristic, which is something that is human in us, right? So how do we, as humans, then speak to an image of God in the midst of that?
Other ideas on this? I mean, we don't have to be the only ones offering ideas. Oh, good. Yeah,
Hello?
you're on.
You're on.
So if I can collect my thoughts and swallow my nervousness on the microphone. I keep coming back to the concepts that were introduced to me by Michael Dowd here. He's the one with the Christian fish kissing the Darwin fish. And when we're talking about, choosing a God or what God is, I felt like I should at least bring up, we've personified God. Well, first let me say, God is probably something much bigger than what us as humans using 10% of our brains can comprehend or even really get right if we're trying to speculate on what it is. And if you try to define something that's limitless, you're putting limits on it, and then so you're not right. And so over the years, we've personified what we think God is, and for the longest time, it was this old man with a beard sitting on a cloud, keeping track of things in a book, and that's the image that the newest generation just isn't buying anymore, and it's the image that the older devout Christians are really holding on to. And I suppose if we're going to acknowledge that science has proven everything everywhere is connected and it's all part of the same interactive intelligence that we won't ever understand, but we think it's there, how do we bridge the gap? Or how do we start, or does it become our mission as trying to be more Christ-like to try to find ways to let people know that it's okay, that the God on the cloud with the book doesn't really exist in physical reality, but it might be something kind of like that in a much more mystical, yet to be realized by our human eyes type thing. How do we move forward in those conversations when it becomes obvious that okay, I think everything's connected, and that the God on the cloud is kind of old news, and the person who still believes that is clinging to it for dear life, as part of their being.
I think it's an excellent set of questions really there, and I think just as I acknowledged, like, I can't really comment on the text tonight as a Jewish person or as a Muslim because I've never been one. I think I also have to say that I can't comment on God that is beyond human personification because I've never been beyond a human. So I can sense that there is an awareness of God that is way beyond human. But I can't describe that in any way, and I can't interact with that in any way I could feel confidence. But what I can do is I can respond to the God who has approached me as a human. I mean, who I experience as a human being. Just like my dog, I've got a little half Bichon, half Jack Russell Terrier. If he were to describe his relationship with me, he would describe it very differently than me. But he's still having real experiences of me, and he'd have to describe that in dog language. His experiences are real, even though I might say yes, but, yes, but, yes, but his experiences are still real. I think that our experiences of God are still very real, even though God was probably sitting there saying, well, yes, but, yes, but, yes, but, yes, but, all day long in that. So I actually don't have as much problem describing God or thinking of God anthropomorphically even, but where I do have a problem is fixing on one. That becomes an idol so fast. So I think, and quite frankly, I mean, for a liberal progressive like me, the best thing I can do is also be able to invoke God as Father. And for somebody who's not liberal progressive, the best thing they could do is to try to invoke God as Mother. Mother comes easily to me, but Father used to come easily to me. That's how I first came into awareness with God, is I called God Father. And my first experiences of God, I responded to God Father. But then as I went, got older and became more aware of the way language shapes us and so forth, I put aside that term and actually been very much rejected that term for many, 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 many years. And what I had to kind of come to terms with is in never referring to God as Father as a personal spiritual thing, I was actually, there was part of me that was not connecting to the very God that I had experienced when I first called God Father. Since to be able to call God Father again, amongst other terms, reconnected me to that to that kind of location that I had first, had those early awarenesses of God and kind of deepen the relationship. And so
open up to other experiences of God in the midst of that. By being able to fully experience God as Father, then you're open up to, there are other experiences of God that I can experience God as Mother, God
Absolutely,
as friend, God as whatever. I would also want to point out that I don't know that these images that we have of God about being the white man with a white beard on a white cloud somewhere off or whatever is not necessarily a generational thing. It is more of a personality thing. I think I would, if I had to put it in a category, that's where I'd put it. But people don't fit into those boxes very nicely. There are times in our lives when we need to have an image that we can cling to, and I think there are times when all of us have that. But there are also times when we are pulled out of those boxes and able to experience God in a different way. So it's not just a generational thing. I know some pretty spitfire kind of 80-year-olds that never believed that about God. It was never true for them. So just a warning on that. It's not a generational thing, I don't think.
Nor is it a...
And 20-year-olds that do, exactly.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
And there's more actually, this is not even a world history recent thing.
Right,
I mean,
exactly.
Julian of Norwich, consistently proclaimed Christ my mother, and consistently, and was made a saint.
Yeah.
I mean, people didn't have a problem with that, and so I think part of it is we've forgotten our own history, and we've forgotten that the Bible itself uses so many words for God, and not just anthropomorphic, but but also as lightning, as light, and storm, and all these wonderful images. It's like, don't get caught up with one too readily. This God will always transcend that.
So why should anything be amiss?
Yeah.
That was a Julian of Norwich quote. Did you pick that up? All shall be well, and all shall be well, and all shall be well. How could anything be amiss? That's Julian of Norwich. And it's a very Pollyanna-ish kind of thing, right? But she went through some serious struggles to get to the point where she could so totally believe in the open experience of God in the world in all kinds of facets and images, to be able to say that because God is here, all things are good.
Yeah. I think if you have that statement that's consistently made at this close, you're Pollyanna. If you have it from 30,000 feet,
right,
you're a mystic.
Exactly.
Maybe if we don't experience that, all is well, all is well, all is well, at times in our life we haven't quite connected with reality in the way that we should.
Yeah, that humanness, that messiness, that struggle.
Yeah.
She had all that and still could say, how could anything be amiss?
Yeah. Well, that's a good note to transition on, it's time for communion. If you happen to have a bread and wine or juice and crackers at home, we'd love to invite you to join us in this feast. And yeah, I mean, what better way to note? You want to repeat that quote from Julian in Norway?
All shall be well and all shall be well. This is her main quote, and then she says, so if all is well, how can anything be amiss?
Yeah. And can you imagine Jesus on a night of betrayal and desertion, breaking bread and saying, my friends, this is my body which is broken for you. All is well. All is well. All shall be well. This is my blood which is shed for you. And with the fierceness in his words, all shall be well. All is well. How could anything be amiss? How can anything not be amiss? Are those two questions mutually exclusive? In this meal, that paradox between a world that has come apart and chaos and a world that has been brought back together and it is better than ever, come together. Will we ever understand that paradox? Will we ever understand communion? We don't understand it. We simply take it into ourselves and live it. These are the gifts of God for the people of God. I invite you to join in the feast. Amen.
Now it's time to stop your voice and start your ear, to listen to what is spoken here. You know life's too short to live in fear. Somebody else's way. The demons, they will never go away. What are you doing now, they say? Life's no good till I show you how. This is what I say. This is what I say. The most important thing is doing your own thing your own way. It's doing your own thing your own way.
Thanks, guys. Great to have you guys with us again this week, and look forward to catching you at one of your dates while you're in Omaha. And we look forward also to joining you all next week for the start of our new series, Dwelling and Indwelling, the house that God built. This is actually a great series that we've just been through to prepare ourselves for this next one. Once God has made a way where there is no way, then how do we actually start to build on that, create a community that reflects the presence of God and invites the presence of God into our midst in a sustainable way? Those are the questions we'll be asking in our next series. And we are also joining with us, continue to join Marcia McPhee with the Worship Design Studio. She is designing worship resources for the Narrative Lectionary as we are designing educational resources.
Great resources
Yeah.
out there, yeah.
So get online with her at the Worship Design Studio, and get out also to the Facebook page, Darkwood Brew, and also to the Narrative Lectionary Facebook page. Got lots of resources if you are following the Narrative Lectionary, either for personal study or in your church. Well, until next week, my friends, may the Spirit of the living God, made known to us most fully in Jesus Christ our Lord, go before you to show you the way, go above you to watch over you, go behind you to push you into those places you may not necessarily go yourself, but may just lead you into that new awareness of a greater God. Go beneath you to uphold you and uplift you. Go beside you to be your strong and constant companion. And dwell within you to remind you that you are surely not alone. You are loved. Loved beyond your wildest imagination. And may the fire of God's blessing burn brightly upon you and within you, now and always. Amen.
In the middle of the forest, under the shadows of the trees, I had wandered through the darkness until the way was lost to me. And it was there I heard her calling, and it was there I found belief. It was then that I found courage in the hour of my need. And I walk on foot with faith and trust to guide me through the darkest wood. Darkwood. In the valley of the shadows, there is nothing I shall fear. 'Cause if the dark should